The first time I saw a space theme on a website that actually blew me away was Space Jam in 1996, and the second time was today. Well done, Diagram.com. You've done an absolutely incredible job here. And while I love all the little tastefully implemented interstellar aesthetics, the effect that topped them all for me was actually not space theme at all. I mean, this is why I do what I do, guys. I don't create the dope. I'm just a dope delivery guy. Well, okay, just to be clear, I'm talking about this definition here. Alright, enough chatter. Let's blow this thing up for a sec and see what's going on. It's clear we have 3 tiles stacked on top of each other, and each one is slightly rotated. When we move the wand from left to right, there's a reveal effect on the images that appears to consist of 2 changes. The first being the opacity that fades from 0 to 1, and the other is a blurriness factor that gets steadily reduced until the image is crystal clear. I'm also noticing that as we complete the effect on the first tile, the second tile remains almost entirely unaffected, meaning the effect is applied independently to each tile rather than to all of them at once. And finally, I see there's some trickiness with the wand itself. Its motion doesn't appear to have a one-to-one mapping with our mouse. Okay, let's whip open a new code pen and see what we can do. I want to start with the wand because that seems like fun. The body of the wand is long and narrow, and the cap looks like it covers about 1/5 of its length. Both the body and the cap have a gradient that's slightly darker on the outside than the inside. The outer corners are rounded, which won't affect the cap unless we hide the overflow of the wand's body. We can give the body some shadow for a little extra depth, and give the whole wand a starting point somewhere near the center of the screen. Moving the wand around is going to be an interesting challenge. I know we can add a mouse move listener and just make it follow the mouse, but that type of movement is pretty boring and honestly kind of annoying. Funny enough, the movement of the original is actually less responsive and significantly more limited, but somehow it feels more natural than ours. And I think it has a lot to do with the nature of the overall interaction. The point is not to be able to move the wand around freely like I'm battling Lord Voldemort. It's directly related to revealing the images on the tiles. So given that extra context, adding some playful constraints around the motion makes a lot more sense. The simplest way to make our wand's movement a bit more wandy is rather than updating its position directly, we could animate it over a short period of time. This little bit of delay sort of smooths out the motion and already feels a lot more like the original. And while that's definitely a good start, next I want to focus specifically on the wand's lateral motion. When the wand is roughly in the center of the container, the mouse is almost directly on top of it. But as we get closer to either edge of the container, the wand's movement gets amplified in the corresponding direction. And I think it makes sense to do it that way because otherwise the wand would just awkwardly stop at the edges of the tiles. My first thought is that we need a way to extend the maximum range of our wand, thereby allowing it to move further than our mouse can. But not in every direction, just the horizontal ones. Currently, we're setting the wand's position directly equal to our mouse's. But what if we tried adding on a multiplier? That wouldn't change the starting position since 0 times 1.3 is still 0, but it would certainly increase the maximum range to the right by 30% of the width of our window. So now it seems like we need a way to shift our range back to the left. It's almost like we need to modify the starting point from 0 to somewhere over here. I could just pick a random value, but that wouldn't be very precise, so perhaps I'll try splitting the difference of the extra distance. Since we've got an extra 30% to work with, that means we can put 15% on either side. In other words, we can replace negative 100 with the width of the window times negative 0.15. Okay, now we have to do something very similar for the wand's vertical motion. Only this time, instead of increasing the wand's range, it looks like we need to limit it. I'm going to do some guessing here and say that our vertical range needs to go from about 10% to 50%. So let's offset the Y position by 10% of the height of the window. And just like we used a multiplier of 1.3 for the horizontal motion, let's use a multiplier of 0.4 for the vertical motion. Alright, our range of motion is looking really good, but something still isn't quite right. If we do a side-by-side comparison, it's becoming clear that there's some rotation occurring on the original that isn't happening on ours. I'm going to do a rough approximation and say that the total range is probably about 20 degrees from here to here, meaning that starting at negative 10 degrees, As we move our mouse across the screen, that angle needs to steadily increase until it hits a maximum of positive 10 degrees. Well, I'm thinking an easy first step would be to set the wand's starting angle to the minimum of negative 10 degrees. The wand will of course be stuck at this angle for now, but that's why for the next step, I want to use a little trick that I'm going to call the magic slider. In HTML, there exists a type of input called a range, which is just a little slider that lets you set a minimum and a maximum value. We could use a range input to modify the angle of our wand, but the problem is you'd have to go out of your way to go click on it and drag your mouse back and forth to use it. We obviously need something a bit more seamless. But what if there was a way to blow this range input up to the size of our entire screen? And what if there was a way to get it to move back and forth without actually having to click on it? What if we didn't need the range input at all? Let me explain. The distance from one side of my window to the other is 2560 pixels. If my mouse is here, that means it's traveled 0.19 or 19% of the way across. If you recall from earlier, we're already keeping track of where the mouse is at all times. So that means we have a way to get this horizontal percentage value at all times. In effect, we've now converted our entire screen to a range slider without actually requiring a range slider. Let's go back to where we're updating the rotation of our wand. We already set the minimum to negative 10 degrees, and we already know the maximum is positive 10, giving us a total range of 20 degrees. So the last thing our magic slider needs to know is what percentage of that 20 degrees we're currently at. And now we have a working wand, but I'm afraid it has nothing to reveal. What if I told you there is something to reveal? Something I've been working really hard on for the past several weeks. Look, I always say that all big problems are really just a bunch of small problems in disguise. That's certainly not meant to be reductive, but just a helpful reminder that whenever I'm worried a problem seems too big to solve, it's usually because I haven't found the little, more manageable problems it's made up of. It can be hard to remember that though, especially when you're banging your head against your monitor. So I figured a good place to put it would be on my mousepad. One of the many anxieties I had while trying to come up with some good designs was how best to visually represent breaking down a big anxiety into a small one. Oh, well actually, that's not bad. Maybe I'll just use that. Yeah, what? That looks pretty good. I could throw that on a few different designs, maybe even have some other designs too. If you'd like one of your own to help prevent unnecessary headbanging, or maybe you just want to go roast my website design, click the link in the description or head on over to https://hyperplex.store. Alright, back to the magic wand reveal. I want to see if I can get this effect working on just one tile, and then it should be pretty easy to add a few more. Style your tiles however you want, but the important thing is that each one has a centered icon with an image placed absolutely on top of it. Our goal here is to make it so when our mouse moves left and right, somehow it modifies both the opacity and the blurriness at the same time. Here's what I'm thinking. You know how we use that little magic slider trick to convert the mouse's horizontal movement into the rotation of our wand? What if we could try doing the same thing on each of our tiles? But instead of rotation, it would be the opacity and blurriness. What would we need to make that work? We'd need to know the size of each tile and the tile's horizontal position on the screen. That way we could get the mouse's position relative to where the tile starts, and then convert it to a percentage just like we did before. The opacity needs to go from 0 to 1, so it won't actually require any changes. And if you recall, the blurriness is actually reversed, so it'll run from 1 to 0. Just having these values isn't enough though. We still need to actually use them. So let's pass them into our CSS and then apply them to the corresponding properties on the images. And now moving our mouse back and forth anywhere in this range updates the percentage values, which get transferred to our CSS, modifying the opacity and blur exactly as we'd expect. Wait, that's weird. The effect begins before the wand reaches the tile. Oh, because we're using the mouse's position to control the effect. What we need to do instead is use the wand's position. And now the effect doesn't start until the wand reaches the edge of the tile. Huh. Let's go ahead and copy and paste some tiles, and I believe our magic wand effect is complete. Thanks again to today's sponsor, the Hyperplex store. Go check it out. I put a lot of hours into those mouse pads, and I hope you like them.